So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the SR 520 Portage Bay Bridge and Roanoke Lid Project's January monthly construction meeting. For those who attended our last meeting, it's been several weeks since we last provided an update to you folks, so we have a lot of content to go through, especially as we cover work that we've completed over these last couple of weeks, and then also giving an overview of some of the bigger construction updates for the near future, and then also giving a look ahead to 2025. So we are scheduled to go until 1 p.m. and we're hoping to leave about 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. For today's meeting, I just want to note that we are doing things a little bit differently for January. I know that as folks have questions, feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. However, we'll go ahead and go through all of the questions at the very end of the meeting. So don't worry, we're not ignoring you. We're just holding things until after we get through the bulk of the presentation. And then with the slide up here, I'll go ahead and kick us off with some introductions. So as a reminder to you folks, my name is Alan Van. I am the Skanska Public Information Manager. Throughout this meeting, you'll be Sorry, I was muted for a second. You'll be hearing from my colleague, Robin Clark, who is the Skanska Community Liaison. We also have a couple of other folks from Skanska in the room as well. Carmela Chavez, who is the Skanska Construction Manager. And then we have our webinar support team, Kaz and Dakota as well. On the right of your screen, there's some general meeting information. Again, we're going until 1. Reminders for how to submit questions via the Q&A or email, and then also information on how to stay up to date. Next slide, please. Additionally, we have a representative from Graham here, Cheryl, who will be talking, or who will be available rather, to answer any questions about the Montlake project. As a reminder, the Montlake project is nearing completion, and it is directly located right next to the Portage Bay Bridge and Roanoke Lid project. So as folks have questions about the Montlake project, feel free to submit those in the Q&A box, or you can go ahead and send an email to the program email, and we'll be able to direct those to the right folks. Next slide, please. And then before I pass you over to Robin, I'd like to remind folks how to participate in today's webinar. So all attendees are muted. We're going to be relying on the Q&A window for any questions. Feel free to submit those again as your questions come up. As a reminder, all questions are visible to all attendees, so make sure that you're not putting any sort of sensitive information in there or any information that you don't want others to see. If you do have a question specific to your property or any that might be a little bit more sensitive, feel free to send us an email and we'll go ahead and follow up with you via email. Next slide. And then just going over the agenda. We'll be talking about the overall project schedule, where we're currently at in the grand scheme of things, talking about some current activities and also some work that we've accomplished back in December and January, some work that's currently being planned, and then how to stay informed. And again, the Q&A session, the formal Q&A session will be at the very end of the presentation. With that, I believe I'll pass it over to Robin Clark for the bulk of the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Alan, and welcome back everybody who's returning to our monthly meetings, and then welcome to everybody that might be new here. Again, my name is Robin, and I am part of the project team for the Skanska construction side. I'm also here to help kind of walk us through the construction progress and schedule in today's meeting and answer any questions. As Alan mentioned, post your questions in the Q&A section so that we can hopefully answer them at the end of this meeting. But just as a note, if there for some reason is a question that we can't answer right off the bat, or maybe something that requires more research, or we might just run out of time towards the end, we will get back to you. You might receive an interim response just letting you know that we see all your questions and we'll get back to them, but we're going to try to answer as many as possible today. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump in. As you guys can see up here, we have our project map that those of you returning might be familiar with. Our current focus is designing out the project for the new Portage Bay bridges, which will be replacing the existing 520 bridge. And we will be working through the new Roanoke lid, the regional shared use path connections, and the adjacent bike and pedestrian path connections. So where we're at in our project schedule, as I mentioned, we're kind of in our design process, but we're also starting out in our early stages of construction. So the big focus right now, for those of you that are, again, new and returning, you may have noticed outside in the bay, we have some pile driving going on our barges and with those large cranes that are out there on the water. So the last item there that you see on the schedule, those are our in-water pile driving seasons. The star at the very top is where we're at, and part of that Portage Bay North Bridge construction is getting the pile driving going for our work bridge so that we can start going on our Portage Bay North construction foundations via the work bridge. We're about halfway through that first in-water pile driving season, which ends on April 30th. And we'll have a couple more seasons throughout this project. A couple more highlights on here. We have the removal of the existing 520 bridge that'll happen a little bit down the road here, as well as the construction of the Portage Bay South Bridge. We'll have the Roanoke lid construction that begins here very soon and continues throughout the duration, or the big part of the duration of our project schedule. And then we'll have some landscaping or urban aesthetics, including the regional shared use path connections. All right, with that, I'll get into some construction progress. So just some overall construction progress updates since we last met. In December, January, we got quite a bit done. We've continued some of our impact pile driving, as I mentioned, throughout the bay. We're also working through a lot of our identifying of underground utilities via potholing, just kind of in different sections around the project. We're doing some soil testing just for geotechnical analysis to help facilitate our design progress on some of the local streets that you see here on the screen. And we've also been doing some bird deterrent device installations to just prevent nesting on the existing 520 bridge. And then we've done some general inspection of utilities during the night along I-5 near the 520 interchange. We've also had a little bit of night work here in this past month. Some of you may have received some direct notices about TNVs or just general outreach, but for the overall progress, we've gotten started on, again, a lot of our utility inspections, inspecting sewer drains along I-5 just to get really a sense of what's going on out there so that we can facilitate our design progress and the connections to the existing utilities. And again, installing those bird deterrent devices along the current 520 bridge. All of this work has currently been conducted under a temporary noise variance, which would be some of the notices that you guys may have received or seen on our construction corner, which comes with direct hotel accommodations if you guys are in a certain radius of the work. That would be potentially impactful as far as noise and our construction activities. So those folks that we identify, you would have received a flyer, but if you have any questions on that process, we can answer those at the end. And we'll talk a little bit more on the noise variances and the upcoming night work here in a little bit, as well as what that looks like with TNVs, with our MPP CNV. And we'll talk a little bit more on the upcoming noise with our February impacts and what we're looking at down the road. So starting in pile driving, just kind of as our big construction activity right now, for the January progress, we've been installing anywhere from 2 and 8 piles a day on average. That's kind of our goal, with the sweet spot being 4 per day. And that's with all 3 of our cranes and barges that are currently out on the bay. We have one on that north side where you see it in green there, the progress of how we've been getting through our work bridge construction. And then we have two that are currently on the south side there, again, in that green section. Our third one just showed up recently this month to get started on some additional pile driving and work bridge construction. And those two will eventually start working opposite of each other towards the east and west land-based sides. Currently, we've installed 77 piles to date, and we're looking good on that progress. For another note, kind of on some correspondence that we've encountered, some folks have experienced days where you might not hear as much noise, or maybe don't even hear any noise. And that's kind of where I note that our daily goal is that 2 to 8 piles a day. But there are some days where we refocus our crews to establish the decking and the platform on our work bridges. So there may be days where you don't hear nearly as much noise as other days. We try to be strategic about it and how we plan out our crews, just to try and not overlap too much with the pile driving activities, but they do sometimes overlap. So that's kind of what the explanation and reasoning behind some of those wavering numbers there for our piles per day. All right, and with that, we'll get into some current activities that we're working on this month and getting into now that we're rolling into February. Can't believe the year's already a 12th over. It feels like it's flying by. So here in February, we are focusing on a couple new areas, but really some more of what you guys have been hearing in our monthly update meetings. So we'll again continue our impact pile driving throughout Portage Bay. We're working towards that April 30th date to get our goal of pile installations for the certain areas of the work bridge, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we'll be also completing some more nighttime work. This time, just to note, we'll be working under our NPP CNV as opposed to TNVs. And I'll get into that again here in a minute, just on the level of detail of what all that is going to include. So we will be working on some temporary work with the trestles and the work bridges at night. And we'll be continuing to do some of that soil testing and utility inspection at night. Another activity that we'll be getting into is removing some trees and clearing some vegetation on both sides of the project. But in February, we're particularly focusing on the east side of the project there that you see on the map. We'll be getting started in that Valdosta Trail area, and that'll help facilitate some of our future construction for the temporary works and permanent works of the bridges. So again, this is just kind of an overall big picture map. A couple things I want to point out here. We've got some nighttime works that we're looking ahead for in February. Those are noted in black. We've got some current activities and upcoming activities during the day in green. And then I also want to point out that the SDOT curb and ramp work and the street improvements there in blue. Those are ongoing, but they are continuing to progress well, I believe, in their schedule. All right, touching back again on our pile driving, just as we get into a look ahead for this month and throughout the spring. We are continuing to pile drive. We started this past fall in the area in orange, and we started working our way towards the west on that north side. We also, again, brought those two cranes in, two barges on the south side, and those will be continuing to work opposite each other towards the land. Our goal over the lifetime of the project is going to be just over 700 piles that will be installed, but this season in particular is going to be 379. So as kind of a note, our progress right now is 77, and we're still anticipating that by April 30th, we'll have those 379 piles installed. As we install those piles, I again kind of emphasize that it'll be anywhere from 2 to 4 to 8 piles a day as we kind of swap from pile driving to vibrating to actually installing the platform and the other materials that go into building out what will eventually be our work zone and work platform for building the new Portage Bay bridges. All right, so here's kind of a drone view of all of our progress. It's really cool. It's kind of exciting for us because we've made all this neat progress as we've gone on, and it's a good viewpoint for those of you online to kind of see where we're at. You can see there in green what is pointed out for the piles, and those are the things that we are pile driving, impact driving, as well as vibrating into the ground, with the cranes that you see towards the left that are currently on barges. We have that long stretch there on the north side that is the work bridge itself. This north side has been primarily focused on driving the piles to get really far ahead in progress. So that's why you see those beams that are kind of connecting, but there's still a lot of space in between the beams. Whereas on the south side, it's a little bit harder to see in this photo, but there is a platform on the portion that we've completed. So it's not as long in the stretch that we've progressed because not as many piles have been driven. But you can see that the deck has been building out with that progress. So that's kind of how the crews have been sequencing that work. And eventually this will expand to both sides of the land. All right, shifting a little bit of gears to some other work that we are anticipating in February, just to give you guys a look ahead for some traffic effects to not look forward to. That's a terrible phrase because we never look forward to traffic, but to look ahead towards. So throughout January and kind of getting into February, we've continued again that soil testing and some of the utility inspections throughout these different local street areas. We are going to continue that on the list that you see there: Boyer Avenue, 11th Avenue, East Roanoke Street, Delmar Drive, Boylston Avenue East. These are typically daytime impacts. We try to avoid rush hour, and we provide our notices via construction corner so you guys can see when those are coming up. We'll typically conduct all of this work under lane closure or flagging, and it just kind of depends on what that street and work zone looks like. And then if there's any areas that require us to do this work under nighttime closures, there will be some like intermittent scheduling of that to make sure that we have the work zone safety to get our crews out there, conduct the work, and just make sure that we're knocking it out under those closures. All right, and some upcoming nighttime work to continue kind of talking along the lines of nighttime work, noise variances, etc. All right, so a big update for us is that throughout the first portion of this project, we've been working under our temporary noise variance, or a TNV. This is a permit process that we apply for through the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections. We provide them with essentially a notice of the traffic impacts and the work that we're going to be conducting, typically between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And we let them know what's going on. We give them kind of a heads up when that's going to happen, and then they will review and issue a TNV if they permit it. So the typical process of a TNV then kicks back to us if it's approved, and we reach out to anybody within a 300-foot radius of the work zone to offer hotel accommodations to neighbors that might be affected by some of our loud noise activities. For example, some of the work that we did in January, like the bird deterrent activities, or some of the utility inspections and investigations on the I-5 near the 520 interchange, those were notices that we provided, and within those impact radiuses, you would have received a flyer for that. Now, kind of shifting gears, we are going to be working under our MPP CNV, which is our major public project construction noise variance. It's a little bit different than the TNV in that it's a larger scale noise variance for our project that allows us to do this work at night without those individualized permits. A little bit more about the MPP CNV. So most of you guys may have received a mailer or some sort of notice about the MPP CNV activating. This is again a process that was gone through with the SDCI, the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, so that they could review the broader scope of this project, understand our logistics, our impacts with traffic, construction, and what we would have to conduct as far as work at night. So typically with the MPP CNV, it is again project-wide, but it sets our certain allowable limits for nighttime construction noise. And it allows us to essentially work at night as long as we're under a certain threshold. Something that we've talked about in previous monthly meetings that I won't touch too much on here unless folks have questions is that we've installed noise monitors across the project to kind of help in that process. So those noise monitors will measure at nighttime TNV, MPP, CNV, or otherwise if we are making any noise. And then we have alerts that are sent to us, the project team, and WashDOT if we exceed or even get close to some of those levels. So we have a warning and an exceedance level, and those alerts go out if we get close with either one of those. If those happen, we typically at the warning level will pause our operations and kind of assess what's going on, what's causing the noise, investigate it, and see what we can do to bring those levels down. If we exceed the levels, we stop work completely. We again assess if we can proceed forward without exceeding those levels, but if we can't exceed those levels, then we stick to daytime work or we find a different way to go about our construction. So I go into this because our permit for the MPP CNV will go into effect on February 5th of this month, and then it extends for 6 years. That's not to say that we won't keep you guys informed about the construction at nighttime. It'll just be a little bit different than what we've been doing previously, where we've been emailing out or mailing out some of these flyers and notices for the TNVs in certain radiuses. This time it'll be more of our construction corner updates, our monthly meeting updates, and some of the similar messaging that we've been providing to you guys for other construction activities. So a couple things I want to get into just with the details of the MPP CNV as far as what's allowed and what is not allowed. So a couple examples here. These are some activities that we may have in the next several years that may happen at night. We have some excavations for digging, trenching, embankments, pavings, and some of these equipments on land base that will be working at night, potentially under lane closure, just to enhance the safety aspect of our work. Or we might have some concrete sawing, some equipment with concrete debris, rubble removal, etc. that may happen as well. Another example might be the work bridge, the work trestle that we're currently at right now. We're trying to work through some of that platform that I discussed earlier, and some of that might roll into those nighttime hours. And a couple other examples here, just some allowable activities under that MPP-CNV will be installing some support structures. Concrete pours are a big one. Paving, signing, striping, all of these activities are ones that we could potentially plan for nighttime activities over the next several years. But again, I just want to emphasize that if any of these activities look like they're going to exceed those noise levels, then we have to reset and adjust our means and methods. So something I want to also emphasize is what's not allowed under the MPP-CNV. And that kind of kicks us back into this TNV project or process. We do still anticipate the use of TNVs on this project because the MPP CNV does not cover any activity that is impact work. So what I mean by impact work, that would be actual demolition using a hammer, using a bucket, using jackhammers, removing concrete, anything that you see on the screen here. or really anything that's defined by that impact level. So the typical pounding noise you might hear from any of these activities is not allowed under the MPPCNV, and we have to apply for the TNV through the SDCI. They have to review the legitimacy of that work and provide us with a permit if it's allowed. All right, and then again, just kind of a recap on all of this. I know that's a lot of information, and a lot of y'all might have some questions with that. One big thing I do want to emphasize is that pile driving for us is not permitted at nighttime. So past 10 p.m., you will not hear pile driving activities from our team. We may have some work on those work bridges, but there is not going to be any pile driving, TNV and PPCNV or otherwise at nighttime. We will continue throughout this month to, again, work on those work trestle platforms, do some soil testing, inspect some underground utilities, and install bird deterrent devices. Most of those activities we don't anticipate will be much louder than kind of the ambient noise you would hear on the interstate. But you can always keep up with us via the construction hotline if you guys start to hear something of concern. And we'll touch on that towards the end of our presentation here. So with all of that said, I'll kind of roll into some other activities here. But I also want to emphasize that up until this point, we have not been conducting any of this impact work or pile driving at night. We've had a couple one-offs for those soil testing and utilities, but I know there have been some concerns out there about some pile driving at night. It's not happening. We don't anticipate it happening at this time, but we'll keep you guys updated as we go through these monthly meetings and updates of that night work and when it's going to happen. Some additional just mitigation measures that we're planning on. We're going to be installing acoustic fence around the site, which I'll talk about here in a second as well. We have some temporary noise shields and other devices that we use around our equipment for noise mitigation. We again would apply for separate TNVs. I might ask you to switch back on slide. Sorry, flip slides are too quick. We'll be prohibiting impact work without a TNV. So we'll go through the SDCI process for that. We'll be continuously monitoring our noise throughout the project and throughout your neighborhoods. And we will have that noise monitoring data available to us 24/7 for those warning and exceedance thresholds that I talked about earlier. If any of that happens, we'll stop our work, assess our plan, and if we can't move forward without exceeding those levels, we'll reassess our means and methods and approach to the work. Just a note there down on the bottom of the slide, we do have an independent noise monitor who's kind of a catch-all quality person that's on site. If we get a call or if we get a exceedance on our noise monitor, that person inspects our work and kind of inspects the source of the noise to see what's going on so that we can assess the issue. All right, and then jumping into a little bit of the acoustic fence side of things, just as a detail. Some of you who have driven in the past by the Bagley viewpoint may have seen this from past projects. The black fence there in the picture with that fabric on it is what's called Acoustifence. This month, we're planning on starting to install that in a couple different areas on our project as the work gets closer to the land-based portions with the work trestle, and then as we get started in a couple land-based areas with our construction activities. That just is really a noise dampener that helps keep a buffer for the construction noise between your homes and our activities. Here's kind of a map of those strategic areas that we're installing the Acoustifence. We're working to get some of that installed this month as the work bridges get closer to land. And then again, we have some land-based areas that we'll be installing this spring, kind of around that new Roanoke lid area to make sure that we are not impacting folks nearby. That's not to say this is all inclusive for other noise mitigation measures. We do have, again, those equipment, noise shields. We have noise blankets and other things that we'll be using in some of these areas with the night work that happens to, again, make sure we're not exceeding our noise levels. All right, another shift gears here. I'm going to touch on some nearby construction projects just briefly. Just a reminder for folks, we've touched on this in past meetings as well, but I want to provide you guys with kind of a catch-all one-stop shop for the SDOT curb, ramp, and sidewalk improvement project. For those of you who kind of live and drive around the Boyer Avenue and 11th Avenue area, you guys have probably experienced some of the construction and traffic impacts that have been going on out there as they get ready for our project to come in by updating some of the sidewalk crossings, ADA ramp areas, and general hardscape improvements around there. So I want to just kind of emphasize to folks here, if you guys have any questions about the impacts, about the schedule, or general information, we do have some contact information here for their community liaison, Matthew Howard. He's great to communicate with and can help kind of answer those questions, and really a lot faster in a sense than we can, because he'll have more of the updated information than we will right out of the gate. All right, back to our project, some other upcoming work. So just looking ahead past February and kind of into the spring and summer for our project, for the next 3 to 4 months, we're again looking at our impact pile driving, tree removal and vegetation removal starting on that Mont Lake side near the Bill Dawson Trail. With that will come some short-term Bill Dawson Trail closures and just some project acoustic fence installation. As we get through that process and get into April, we'll kind of flop sides to the west side of the project, and we'll have some tree and vegetation removal on the Roanoke area and Boyer Hillside area. And we'll begin some long-term closures here in the later springtime for the Boyer Stairs and the Bill Dawson Trail, which I'll touch on here in a minute. And then just a reminder that our season 1 for the impact work, pile driving and water, ends on April 30th. And then we'll return for season 2 in September. We'll still have our barges and cranes out on the water because there will still be some vibration work that happens for installing those piles. And then we may have some land-based pile driving later this year. I don't anticipate any of that here in the near future, but we're kind of working through that schedule right now. Okay, getting into my topic of interest, really, because I'm working with some of the operations team directly on this, the tree removal schedule. So we are looking at the project area, and we've been consulting our arborists to strategically remove trees and clear vegetation in certain areas of the project as we get ready for construction activities. So starting here in February, probably the 3rd-ish week of February is what we're aiming for. We'll be focused in that red area on the Mont Lake side of the project. You guys will have started to see some of the impact removal notices or potentially the protection notices, which are flyers in neon yellow and neon green that we post on the trees. Excuse me. And they tell us basically whether the tree is going to be protected or removed. It's a notice to the public and to our construction team that just provides more information on what trees are going to be impacted. All of these trees are being assessed with our design team, our construction team, and again, our arborists to really understand what needs to be removed in order to facilitate the construction and building of the new project, but also what can be left in place so that we keep some of these trees that don't necessarily need to be removed if they're not going to be impacted. Later this spring, we'll be again flopping to the west side of our project to do some select tree removal on the north and south side of the 520 interchange, getting next to I-5 there. This is going to be in preparation for some utility work and installation later this summer. And then we'll be kind of working towards the East Roanoke Street from Boyer Avenue, going from the east to west on the map there. All right, another little gear shift back over to the west side here. We do have some build-outs and trail closures coming up. So a big topic and planning area for us, as you guys know from past meetings, is the Build Austin Trail, the closure, the duration, and the detours. So here in February, March, we are planning on a couple short-term closures and flagging impacts to help us facilitate those tree removals safely so that we can remove things and get our equipment across, material across without causing any safety hazards to the public. What that looks like as far as a short-term closure is just in this red area, we'll post either barricades if it's the 1 or 2 day closure, or we might have a flagging operation for up to 15 minutes, just holding folks while we get some of that material across the trail there. So again, that's really to facilitate our tree and vegetation removal in that area. And then getting into the longer term Bill Dawson Trail closure, I mentioned this spring we are moving towards the long-term Bill Dawson Trail closure between Montlake and Boulevard and the playfield. We're looking to close that for 5 years, and that's going to go into a lot of construction activities and facilitating our work. And I'll touch on that here in a minute. We are closing the Montlake Tunnel during this process, just one for the safety side of things, and two, because our construction impacts will get pretty close to that Montlake Tunnel. So what you're seeing here on the screen is the progress we've made thus far, kind of taking some feedback from folks and also working with the city of Seattle and WashDOT and our designers to update our detours for folks to get around this closure in the long term. Overall, we're still working to finalize those details. They're not quite there. We're getting close, but we're not there yet. Once we get that finalized and once we have an official closure date, we will be sending out emails, updating our construction corner. We'll let you guys know in this monthly meeting, and we'll be posting signs out in the field. I call it the field, out on the trail for you guys, just as additional notice and kind of communication to you guys. So why we're closing it for 5 years, a big part of this is the work bridges that allow us to work alongside the new Portage Bay Bridge area. We'll be accessing our work zones via this, what you see on this map here, which is kind of overlapping with the Bill Dawson Trail. We're going to create an access road that attaches to our work trestle, and that allows us to work on the work bridge and begin construction for the new Portage Bay bridges. It also allows us to have just generally safe access, eliminate conflicts and kind of interfacing with public versus our construction. And it allows us to bring large transportation equipment, cranes, drill rigs, lifts, and other materials that'll help us again with that construction process. And that also in turn helps us eliminate our need for a significant amount of closures on SR 520 itself. It helps us by allowing us to bring the barges in to help with some of the material deliveries and kind of reduces the overall impact from our nighttime work plans. And a little bit more on that. So the construction here is really focused on the safety for our crews. That 5-year duration is going to include building the access, building the new Portage Bay North Bridge, and the installation of our temporary bridges, which I'll show here in a minute. It's also going to be the connection for our South Work Bridge and our transportation of really large materials such as girders and other big elements that go into the final structures of the project. I do want to note that part of the trail is just going to be generally blocked by the embankments and the false work that it takes to build these aspects of our access. But again, it kind of counteracts the impacts in some of the other areas that we would be taking otherwise with nighttime lane closures on SR 520. So this is really our approach to the construction, and it allows us to get going on the work bridge. And ultimately, it allows us to start work and construction on the North Bridge without lasting long-term impacts of closing the existing 520 bridge. And then here's another just kind of drone overlay. We can touch on this if anybody wants to or wants to look at it towards the end or has questions, but just a look ahead of what that's going to look like as far as the platform and the connection once it gets built out there in gray. So a little bit further ahead, some planning upcoming and construction activities before we move into our final Q&A session. So throughout the year, we'll be continuing again pile driving. We'll have some vibratory pile driving this summer. We'll have some city street traffic impacts, and we'll be working through the final design of our temporary overpass by the Roanoke Lid area, which we've touched on in past meetings. And we're about halfway through the design process for that. So we'll recap that in a future meeting and give you guys kind of an update once we have more information there. Our season one for in-water work again ends in April. So we'll be continuing that throughout the spring. After that April 30th date and into May 1st, we'll only be doing the vibration driving until September. That may not be for the full summer. That may just be some one-offs here and there, but we're still working out the schedule and logistics on that. And then we will have potentially some pile driving on the land over on the Boyer Hill side later this year, rolling into next year. Another one highlight that I want to focus on is the traffic effect that's going to be happening this summer. One of our first major traffic shifts, which is part of the process of the Bill Dawson Trail closure and our work trestles, is going to be the construction of what we call our temporary Bridge 1. It's a big traffic shift that we are building out to essentially maintain the flow of traffic getting onto Montlake Boulevard. And it allows us to kind of condense the closures needed to do this work into probably a couple full weekend closures and some nighttime closures of the Portage Bay Bridge, some nighttime lane closures. We'll continue again to notify you guys when these start coming up. So just to give you guys a visual of what that looks like, here's the current existing condition of the Montlake interchange. We're focused on the south side for this summer. And what we're going to be doing is creating in purple a new temporary bridge and ramp, off-ramp to Montlake Boulevard from SR 520. And that'll allow us to close the orange area, which is the existing ramp. This kind of kicks off a series of traffic shifts over the next couple of years that are going to allow us to maintain a flow of traffic as we get through the construction process. And again, just some additional visuals, because if you guys are like me, a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. So what you see here is kind of a VDC or a 3D rendering of what that shift is going to look like. The red is the existing ramp that we'll be removing, and the blue is going to be a new structural ramp that connects to Montlake Boulevard. The construction will start this summer, kind of in the May to July timeframe, and we'll be building out from the new temporary bridge, continuing through some of our superstructure elements and our new piers and columns, and then getting that ready, paved and striped so that we can then put traffic on it in the blue area. and then we'll close the existing off-ramp, do a traffic shift so that people can still exit onto Montlake Boulevard. And with that, one last thing before we get into Q&A. I think I said that before, but one last thing. So we do have some utility work coming up this summer as well. This will be over on the west side of the project on the Boyer Hillside area. We're looking at relocating a water line and a 26 kV utility line. We're working with SPU, SCL, and other folks to coordinate that work. And we'll begin in April and kind of work throughout the summer and fall on some of those relocates. That's gonna really kick off with our clearing and vegetation removal, and then we'll roll into those utility locations. We've kind of worked out the schedule to make sure that we're cohesive with some of the other elements of our project. And then we'll have that facilitated with some single lane closures and flagging, but we don't anticipate any major full closures on Boyer Avenue. This will impact some of the Boyer stairs right there on that area in yellow, which will, similar to the Bill Dawson Trail, be closed for up to 5 years. We'll continue to keep you guys updated on both of those big traffic shift and utility operations as we get closer to those days, but just want to give an overall highlight. All right, so with that, I'll kind of kick it over to Alan. Hopefully I didn't take up too much of our time here for Q&A.
Your timing is perfect, Robin. Thank you so much. Before we dive into some of the questions that are remaining in the Q&A chat, I'm just wanting to send a reminder to folks for how to stay informed. We do have several different methods for you to reach out to us. We have our 24-hour construction hotline with the number listed right there, 206-319-4520, trying to make it nice and easy for you, 4520. We have our Construction Corner website listed here as well, where you can go ahead and see some of the traffic effects that are in your neighborhood that are a result of this project. And also we will be posting our meeting recording and meeting materials there as well. We also have a couple of frequently asked questions documents there in regards to tree and vegetation removal, and a couple of other materials as well that you folks may want to reference in the future. And then we also have our email updates that we will send out via our email. And then we also have monthly meetings as well, which we do not have a date yet for our February meeting, but we will be sharing that date soon. Next slide, please. And then with that, we have 10 minutes left for our Q&A. And apologies, earlier in the meeting, I stated that all the questions would be saved to the very end. There were a handful of questions that we went ahead and responded to in the chat. So make sure that your Q&A box is open to see some of our responses. We will be following up with some of you folks via email just due to the level of detail that is required to respond to your inquiries. But for the remaining questions that are in the chat, we'll go ahead and read them in chronological order. Of course, if any other questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat, or if any questions come up later as you're reviewing project materials or thinking more about the information that we presented to you today, feel free to send us an email or give us a phone call, and we'll be sure to get you the information that you need. With that, the first question that we have is from Ben Ramsey. How do the bird deterrent measures work?
So far, so good. They are deterring the birds for what I understand. So essentially what we did is we went out there, I believe put up some type of fencing material, some mesh material on the existing bridge so that they can't land and start to nest there. We haven't seen any signs of them beginning to nest, but we'll continue installing some of those measures along the existing bridge. And we're kind of keeping an eye on that area just to make sure we don't see any signs of that, because that would trigger a separate process. So far, so good.
Great. Thank you, Robin. Then a question from Angie Nguyen. What is your plan for street parking on Boyer Avenue? Sorry, my Q&A scrolled. What is your plan for street parking on Boyer Avenue? She's continuing to see contractors parking on the streets, which takes up valuable parking for residents. And just wanting to acknowledge some of the slides that we had presented earlier. There are several other crews that aren't Skanska or are subcontractors that are out there, but I'll let Robin go ahead and talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so that's been actually a hot topic with our construction team in trying to avoid the street parking itself, and allow folks that live there to utilize the street parking. I understand there's been some challenges out there, especially with some other project coordination and some other contractor coordination that unfortunately we don't always have the direct control over. But I will say for our construction and our crews, we don't intend to take any of that parking at this time. We have directed all of our subcontractors, all of our team to either park within our work zone under the bridges themselves while still maintaining sidewalk access, or two different avenues: carpool to the site from our offsite locations, either our yard or otherwise, or park up at certain areas such as Bagley Viewpoint. That might be an actual parking lot that won't take away from that street parking, and just walk down to the work zones.
Great, thank you, Robin. For the next question from Greg DuPont, he has noticed that the barge work is creating some new muck islands as the South Portage Bay bottom is dug up. Is there a plan to restore the effects on this previously natural environment on this bird migration region?
I'll have to look into the islands myself, and I'll get with the team as far as where those are located. Maybe that can be something we can look into as far as some detail of where those are starting to pop up. Our intent is to mitigate those as much as we possibly can via turbidity curtains and containing our work to very select zones. So we're aiming to avoid those entirely. But we will have our environmental team go inspect those and see what needs to be done. And then we do have some shoreline mitigation planned at the very end of our project to get at the abutments of the bridges to restore those areas just from our construction impacts.
Our next question is from Stan. Are hotel accommodations available under the MPP CNV? And if so, are the conditions different from those in the temporary noise variances?
I will potentially just clarify with the WashDOT team and our team on some of the logistics of that, but I don't believe there are any changes between the TNV and the MPP CNV. The major change is really just the notification process. We won't necessarily send out that 300-foot radius notification to folks. We'll still notify people via our other methods of communication, but we won't send out specific flyers about the TNV. Hotel accommodations will still be available. So if you do experience some of those impacts from the nighttime noise, you can call us, you can email us via the hotline, and we can get you lined out with those accommodations.
Great, thank you, Robin. And to further elaborate on that just a little bit more, so if we were to obtain a temporary noise variance from the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, there are requirements in there to notify those neighbors within 300 feet of our work zone and offer hotel accommodations. With some of the work that we had described earlier that's going to be conducted under the MPP CNV, that means that that work can be conducted without the temporary noise variance. So the requirement for offering hotels or notifying folks specifically about that phase of work is no longer required. For our next question, similarly, so Greg DuPont asked, the 300-foot radius for offering hotel accommodations for overnight work seems to be mostly completely in the water. And just to paraphrase, what is up with the 300-foot requirement?
That may be some research I have to do as far as how that requirement came about, and how the 300-foot was determined in the TNV process. So Alan, I'll probably ask our team if we can placeholder that one for some additional follow-up and information. I don't know of the full history of how that radius was determined, but I do know that there was extensive research that went into the noise analysis for this project. And I do know that a lot of this goes into some of the state and local regulations that are already established.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Greg, we'll follow up with some more details via email for you. The next question, I'm going to paraphrase this one as well, but just noting that there are several different projects happening near the west side of our project. So we have the SDOT Rapid Ride J Line project on East Lake, and then also the I-5 Ship Canal project, which is not being led by Skanska. But Jim was curious what the interaction between those projects would be with our projects, if any.
Yeah. So I know the most immediate interaction is certainly the SDOT project. We actually have a weekly meeting with them set up to understand their traffic impacts. And I believe in the construction schedule for their work and our work, it's going to line out very well so that most of their work is complete before our work starts on that west side. So we're hoping that there's not going to be any overlap, or if there is overlap, it'll be pretty minimal from the impact side of things. We do try to work through that direct coordination if folks are that close to us, and it's not typical that folks are that close in proximity. Some of the other closures that are a bit farther out, we may not necessarily have a weekly meeting, but we might have some other coordination elements, whether it's by emails or phone calls with these folks to directly coordinate traffic closures and make sure that we're not having things that conflict or having just overall project conflicts. So we do try to touch base with these different projects and establish those lines of communication.
We do meet with them, Mr. Muller. We meet with them weekly with the acting team to verify exactly what Robin said, to coordinate in advance the full closures, directional closures, and lane closures at night. So we talk weekly with them.
Yeah, and that applies also to our counterparts at Graham and Walsh on some of the adjacent projects.
And for the folks who are watching our cameras here, that was Carmelo in the background. So thank you,
Yeah.
Carmelo. We are almost at time, but we are more than happy to stay over just a couple of minutes. We do have several other questions. We may need to move some of them over to email just for the sake of time. But for some of the questions that we have right now, so Kate asked, could notice be given ahead of pile driving, especially on weekends? It is disruptive for social events in homes. So Robin, I know that you mentioned earlier our typical pile driving schedule. It's typically Monday through Friday, Saturdays, and some Sundays. I believe we're scrolling through the timeframes right now. I think just for your sake for planning events or just trying to anticipate noise, we will be working Monday through Saturday for the most part, and again, some Sundays. And if we are planning to work around or on legal holidays, excuse me, we'll make sure to notify folks via our monthly construction meetings.
Yep.
Yeah. I know time's wrapping up, but somebody in there mentioned it was a kudos to the construction team for the MOT, maintenance of traffic and traffic control crews, that they're doing a good job with the detours and bike trails. That means a lot to us, so thank you for that. Our guys take a lot of pride in what they do, and we do too. So a good job means a lot to us sometimes. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, and just to tie into that with what Carmelo said here, and apologize for the camera, he's kind of off screen here, but we want to thank you guys. We'll again continue to stay over a little bit to answer some more of these questions, and we'll wrap them up here in the next few minutes. Get back to you guys via email if we can't answer them in time. But we do want to thank you guys for continuing to interact with us via the monthly meetings, the hotline, etc., so that we can understand your impacts. But also, we appreciate you guys, just the interaction and communication from y'all, so that we can do the best that we can as far as notifying you guys and working through all of these challenges. So I appreciate it.
For the last remaining questions, for Tyler's question regarding the bike detours, we can follow up with you via email. So be on the lookout for an email from me shortly. I do think in terms of the questions that we can answer right now, Kim, your question regarding the Boyer stair closure and any solutions for that, we'll follow up with you via email for that as well. Steve, I see your question regarding the existing road surface and the plans for making that smoother. We'll follow up with you via email for that as well. And then for the one last question that I think we'll go ahead and answer for today's meeting is Ellen's question regarding vibratory pile driving. Robin, could you explain maybe the difference between impact pile driving and vibratory pile driving and the impacts associated with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So really just a quick summary of it. The impact pile driving is using a piece of equipment to basically hammer the piles into the ground and underwater. So it impacts them like that. We do have a separate piece of equipment that uses kind of a shaking method or a vibration method to get those into the ground. And the difference between the two and why we use one versus the other is that we try to use primarily the vibration method so that we can lower our impacts of noise and really just impacts to the community. But a lot of times we'll get into a hard or difficult surface, ground level or underground subsurface condition with the different geo layers down there in the bay that the vibration method doesn't allow us to get past a certain point. So that's when we have to bring out the pile driving method to actually give more impact and push those piles into the ground and really establish a good foundation. So to answer the question, it will be less noise because it's more of a shaking and vibrating rather than that repetitive impact that you would hear from the pile driving itself.
Great. Thank you, Robin. And Ellen, if you have any follow-up questions regarding the differences, I know that we just went over that pretty quickly. Let us know. I know that we already owe you a email in regards to one of your other questions, so we can certainly include that information as well. I believe that is the end of the remaining questions that we have. Again, for any that are still outstanding, we'll follow up with you via email. I also see a couple of requests that aren't questions, so we'll make sure to send you the requested information too. And then for if you wanted to review the meeting again, we have our recording posted on both our WashDOT project website and the Construction Corner at sr520construction.com. We'll also have a PDF of the presentation available to you as well. Yeah, if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to send us an email or give us a call, and we will be following up with you shortly. Again, we'll be meeting with you sometime next month in February. Dates will be announced via social media and our email updates, so be on the lookout for updates there. Thank you, everybody, for your time this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.